This is Lisa Murkowski, Chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, with Murkowski's Message podcast. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Murkowski's Message. This is Friday, May the 29th. I appreciate you all joining me. I am currently in Alaska. I am on day 9 of a 14-day quarantine here in Anchorage. Quarantine can be a challenge, but I think it's made a little bit easier when we have some of the great weather that we have had here in South Central and really around the state. It's part of the summer that we welcome every year as people are able to get outside and go camping and hiking and just enjoying all that Alaska has to hold. But we also know that as the weather warms and as the snow disappears and people are out around campfires, that we also see an increase in the risk of wildfires. So today we have an opportunity to discuss some of the challenges that face Alaska firefighters. We are joined this morning by our state forester and the director of the Alaska Division of Forestry, Chris Maisch. Chris has been working, serving Alaska for over 3 decades now, 36 years serving the state, 21 of those with the state of Alaska. And so it is good to have you with us this morning, Chris, to talk about some of the issues that we face as a state, what we might anticipate with this year's fire season. But before we do, I just want to acknowledge that our prayers are with those state forestry individuals that went down in an airplane in Antioch this week. We understand that they're in the process of recovery, but we're keeping them and their families in our prayers, and just wanted you to know that we thank them for the work that they do that's so important, so invaluable.
Thanks, Senator. We appreciate that.
Well, and thank you, because we know that the men and women who are there to serve us, when it comes to dealing and battling with fires, we know that they are out there on the front lines, and that in Alaska, getting to the front lines doesn't mean you hop in your truck and you're there. How we move our fire crews around can be very challenging, and it requires good, skilled aviators. But as we know, things happen, and we just want you to know that we appreciate the work that our fire crews do every day, and certainly for your leadership as part of all of that.
Well, thank you, and we'll certainly pass that information down through the ranks.
Well, thanks. So let's begin really kind of generally your thoughts on the wildfire activity outlook for this summer. You know, last year we saw more acres burn here in the state than they had in the entire lower 48. We had the Swan Lake fire on the Kenai, which was the most expensive and, as I understand, the most heavily staffed fire in the nation. We've already had a few fires here at home already. So what should Alaskans expect for this year's fire season?
Well, that's a very good question, and we are always in the fire world asking ourselves that same question. And we do have what's called predictive services that tries to look at long-term patterns and weather and make predictions for the year. This year, because in part of the healthy snowfall we had around Alaska, much of it above normal, that created a below normal early season forecast for at least much of the interior in May. And then for June, July, and August, right now the long-term forecast is what they're calling a normal year. I think that's probably better to say a typical year. I'm not sure what's normal anymore with some of the weather variables we have to deal with. So that's good news, because last year, of course, we had the drought, especially down in the Kenai and the Mat-Su, and we had very difficult conditions from the weather aspect of things. And so this year right now it's looking to be a more typical year, but even in a typical year the state still burns about 1.2 million acres, and so that's a lot of acreage, and but we're prepared and ready to deal with that if that's what happens.
So I know that up in Fairbanks you had a couple really warm days already. I know that for folks down in Southeast, down in the Tongass, where we usually don't think about forest fires because Tongass is a rainforest, that they too have had some really nice, good spring weather. But you're saying that necessarily isn't a predictor, if you will, of what you might anticipate for the season. So you're saying when you think that this will probably fall in the normal or typical wildfire season, you're not seeing any particular areas of the state that might have higher threat than others?
No, at this time, based on many different parameters we look at, the states, there are no areas in the state that have a higher risk than any other portion of the state. So it's kind of a neutral outlook, if you will. Of course, that can change quickly. It doesn't take very many days here, especially in the interior, of nice sunny weather to dry things out and really change that. And of course, what really gets most of our bigger seasons going is the lightning season. And I saw a really interesting statistic the other day that just 2 days ago we entered a 70-day window where we get 90% of our lightning strikes in Alaska. And so really the lightning season is just getting started. We just finished what we call the human-caused season, which is brownup, April, May. And so the big years usually are driven by a lightning event after a long, warm, dry period. So that's what we'll watch for. Hopefully that won't occur. But like last year, that happened in 2015. Same thing. We had about a 10-day, 2-week period of very hot and dry weather. And then dry lightning storms came through, and that just really lit up the state. And that year, too, in 2015, we were more than half the national acres. We burned a little over 10 million acres that year nationally, and we were 5.2 million in 2015. And then, as you said, we were more than half here this last year. So those aren't. I don't like. I'd rather not have those statistics here in Alaska, but in the last 5 years, we've had 2 of the highest seasons that we've had.
Yeah. Well, and I think you recognize. You know full well because you live it, but we also recognize that the best laid plans don't necessarily come out as we would have hoped or planned, because Mother Nature intervenes. You mentioned the lightning strikes. You get just the right wind at the right time with low humidity, and things happen. And so your job is a very complicated one when it comes to wildfire management. Well, COVID-19 pandemic has caused further complications to that management. You've got firefighters who are putting their lives on the line every day to protect us, and so we respect that, we honor that, but we also know that we have an obligation to protect them from the virus so that they can safely fight fires, return to their families when the fires are out. And so let's talk a little bit about how wildfire management is made further complicated because of what we're having to put in place necessarily because of the COVID-19 pandemic, just in terms of how we house fire crews, how we move them, how we feed them. How are you adapting your suppression strategies and really the crew camp strategy as we're dealing with COVID-19?
Well, that's a really good question, Senator. We've, of course, been working on this for a while now, and it's been a national effort, and then it's scaled down to each individual state, developing how they can best protect both our employees from COVID-19 as well as the public when we're engaging with them, when we're doing suppression work. And as you know, we use incident management teams to manage large project fires like a Type 1 fire or a Type 2, which are our most complex incidents, usually involve urban interface, where you have lots of people. And so there's just a whole host of things that need considered. And I'll be honest, it was a bit daunting for all of us, I think, to try and figure out how could we operate with COVID as an overlay to the things that we normally do, which are already inherently dangerous. We added this other element. So we've done a lot of planning at the national and state level by standing up our own internal incident management team that's focused just on this COVID topic. And so we've got a Division of Forestry handbook that's got the mitigation measures we're going to take. A lot of this is how do you communicate it to everybody so that they understand what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and why we're going to do it. Those are kind of three key things. And so for some examples, of course, aggressive initial attack. Everyone in the country is really stressing that we're going to get right on fires. We always do, but we're even going to be more aggressive, if you will. Aviation will play a key role in that, and more aggressive use of aviation resources perhaps sooner than we normally would, just to really try and catch fires and catch them at the initial attack or extended attack stage. If a project does go into what we call the project fire stage, which is usually 72 hours after a fire started, if we don't catch it, that's usually when you're going to start calling it Type 2, Type 3, Type 1 fire. Things get more complicated. Of course, PPE is a key part of this, but in the real world, it's also difficult. You're not probably going to be wearing a mask on the fire line. That's the recommendation, but in practice, with after-action reviews that have happened, the mask's a difficult thing to use actually on the line. But when you're in camp or being transported in a helicopter or a vehicle, masks, gloves, PPE will be one of the requirements. All the hygienic measures will be in place, more washing stations in the camps. The meals will be not served traditionally like we would. We'd often have a salad bar and a line that you'd go through to get your meal. All the meals will be individually boxed and handed out that way with washing stations pre-pickup of the meal. And so a lot of precautions are put in place to try and limit that human contact in the camp. For us, in engines, like I mentioned, we'll be wearing masks, but those engines get washed down, both exterior and interior, after each shift and during the shift as needed. Same thing with the helicopters and the planes. So just a lot of extra measures have been put in place. And I've just scratched the surface for you. There's quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I know as I've had conversations with the chief of the U.S. Forest Service, Chief Christensen, we have talked about the Alaska fire crews. These come out of our villages up north. Some pretty exceptional fire crews. But we also know that we often have lower 48 crews that come up to the state to help us out, and one of the realities that we're dealing with. In fact, I mentioned it at the outset of this podcast. If you're coming from the outside, you've got a mandatory 14-day quarantine. That's in place now. We don't know how long that stays in place, but we also want to make sure that whether or not we have a quarantine from out-of-state folks, that we have some level of assurance that you're not going to be bringing crews from outside the state who might be dealing with the virus themselves, either with symptoms or asymptomatic, and that is something that I know you have been working on. So if you can tell us about what's going on with firefighter testing for COVID-19.
Yeah, you bet. And we are definitely kind of in the forefront of that here in Alaska, and for some of the very reasons you just mentioned. And so we have worked very closely with the unified command team that Governor Dunleavy established as soon as this COVID crisis, hit Alaska, and that includes HSS, our Health and Social Services department and division, is one of the agencies that's part of that unified command. And so we worked very closely with them setting up this protocol that doesn't require testing. It's voluntary testing, and that's been a key word choice to get our federal partners to agree to this process and expectations. And so every resource order that we place, which is how we order things that we need from crews to individual people to an aircraft to an engine, will have a separate sheet of paper that outlines the expectations for an assignment in Alaska. And that's this voluntary testing piece, and then, of course, all the mitigation measures that are in our handbooks and other documents that we've published and will make available to incoming staff. But right now we have testing set up at two locations. One is at Anchorage International, the other is at Fairbanks International Airport, which are the gateway entry points for any of the firefighters coming into the state. And those are being run through a contract that HSS has set up with two private companies, two labs, Beacon and Capstone, that have testing set up there. Firefighters will come in, have their tests, and currently the plan is to, if it's not an emergency and we need them right on the line right now, they'll go into quarantine for anywhere from 24 to no longer than 48 hours till the test results are available. We expect most of that to be less than 24, and then they'll be released for work. If there's an emergency where we need their services sooner, they will still have the test, but they'll be released to go right to the incident to get to work. As soon as we have the results, if we did get any positive results, we would then do the contact tracing and isolate the individual and take measures to deal with that situation. So currently, that's what we have set up, and that is much different than really anywhere else in the country right now. And so we've been working with our federal partners, in particular BLM, to make sure they are comfortable and agreeable to this scenario.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate that and appreciate the steps. I think most Alaskans know very well the stories from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, where you had several Alaska native villages that were almost completely wiped out, and recognizing again that so many of our fires that these crews will be out on will be in remote areas, but with contact on occasion with those again from our smaller, more rural communities. So we recognize and respect the vulnerable populations, and working through these protocols in advance, I think, is something that is just wise. Hopefully, we will be working again to ensure that we're just not seeing an increase in cases, but this has been a challenge on many different levels, and so we appreciate what what the state of Alaska, working with our federal partners, are doing as you help face the annual disasters that we have in our state when it comes to fires, and then coupled with what we're dealing with COVID. So moving off of that and recognizing again that, okay, so many of our fires in the state of Alaska are started naturally through, for instance, lightning strikes. But we also know that particularly in the beginning of the season, so many of these fires that we see in the first place are human caused. What should we be doing as Alaskans to prevent fires as well as to protect our homes and our families from wildfire?
Great question, and as you may know, we had a pretty aggressive program this spring in Alaska where we had burn permit suspension in place for most of the state for most of May, and the idea behind that was to help us reduce human-caused starts, because that's the primary driver of fire season at that time of year. And I'm happy to say we had about a 10% reduction in the number of fires from our 5-year average this spring because of that. And so people were paying attention, and I think that's one of the key things I would stress, is that to help reduce the risk around your own home and for your own family or business, pay attention to the weather, what's going on, if there's a fire weather watch issued or a red flag warning for your area. And certainly any time during the year, you should be doing FireWise principles, which is a list of things, if you will, that you can do to your house or your business to help it be less fire prone and more likely to survive a wildland fire event. And it's a lot of very simple things, and you could Google that, FireWise, and it'll bring you to websites that will have all kinds of information for homeowners that they can look at. We have foresters that will come out and do inspections of your home and make recommendations with a checklist format. We even have some cost share programs for homeowners to help them, do some of the things that are recommended. And then I would also add, if you do have a wildland fire that threatens your community, and we use an evacuation process that's called Ready, Set, Go. And one of the key things to be ready is to have a plan for your family. And I like to always refer to what we call either the 5 Ps or the 7 Ps, and you should think about these things. And I'll give you the list here. The 7 Ps are people, pets, papers, prescriptions, personal computer, photos, and phone. And that's when you're getting ready for something like this. You should be thinking about those 7 Ps and having those things taken care of, ready to load into the car, already perhaps boxed up and easy to get to, not buried down in the basement somewhere. So those 7 Ps are really key things people could be doing right now, just to be mentally prepared. And hopefully they'll never have to do a Ready, Set, Go, but if you do, it'll go a lot smoother for you if you do things ahead of time.
Well, that's good advice, and also very helpful to think about, okay, what is it that, if I needed to evacuate my home quickly, what is my checklist? And so that's good, that's helpful. Very quickly, just because when we talk about fire risk in Alaska, spruce bark beetle kill has always been an issue for us, particularly in certain areas. Are you seeing higher risk this year than normal? Are we at average? Well, what's your sense?
Well, that, as you said, that spruce bark beetle creates additional challenges for us, because once those trees die, a lot more sunlight gets into the forest floor, and it really increases the grass, what we call the light fuels. And so you can get quite a bit more light fuel in the understory of the forest, which tends to be more flammable, so it's easier to have a fire start. And then the trees themselves can throw off more firebrands and create spotting in an incident. So in an area that has had bark beetle impact, those fires can be a little more challenging because of those factors I just mentioned. So the risk in general would be higher than if it were a green forest. And there's not, unfortunately, much we can do to make it green again quickly. So it's really being, again, aware of the things we talked about under Firewise. If you live in an area that's been impacted by the bark beetle, it's even more critically important to do those Firewise principles, which will be remove those dead trees, keep the grass mowed or watered, things that are a lot of common sense. But if you pay attention to those things, it really reduces the risk to both you and your family and your community.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I mentioned at the outset your years, your decades of public service, and for 15 years, which is a pretty good haul, you have been Alaska's state forester, and we're very, very thankful for your service. So they say that retirement is on the horizon. So tell us what that actually means for you and for your family, and just really give you a quick moment to reflect on your experiences as Alaska's chief forester.
Well, thank you, Senator. It's a little daunting, I'll be honest, to think about, and because there's always more things you would like to do, and the people I work with here in this division are just an excellent set of peers and colleagues. It's a very mission-oriented organization, both in the forestry side of it as well as the wildland fire side of it. So it really is hard for me just to step away from that. But it is time. We all don't live forever, and there's other things to do in life. So sometime either this fall or early winter, I will retire. And so lots of different thoughts about what to do with that time. One of them includes a sailboat back on the Great Lakes. And my wife and I are both from that area. We wouldn't leave Alaska, but have a lot of family back there. So we'd spend a couple months each summer with the goal of circumnavigating the Great Lakes over the course of a couple of summers. So I was in the process of buying a boat, but COVID prevented me from traveling in early May to do the final sea trials on that boat. And so anyways, it's delayed a little bit. I think we'll still go ahead with the purchase, but it's in a little port town called Eau Gray, Michigan, on Lake Huron. And so at any rate, that's part of the plan. And I'm sure I'll stay busy with volunteer efforts and other things, but I wanted to make sure the division was, we had a good transition plan, if you will, succession plan, and good leadership in place. And so anyways, it'll be a little bittersweet, but it's time. 15 years has been a great career, and I've served 5 governors during that time. And so I have a lot of good memories, and also a lot of memories I'd like what happened yesterday with the aviation incident. I wish I didn't have, but those things do happen, and we're the better for it in the end. So thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today.
Well, I appreciate our conversation, but truly appreciate your years of service. We've had an opportunity to invite you back to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Energy and Natural Resources Committee on forestry-related issues and fire-related issues, and you bring with you not only a title as Alaska's state forester, but you bring a credibility and a reputation that is respected throughout not only our state, but at the national level as well. And it is well earned, and your retirement is probably very well earned. So know that we wish you well. I know that I will have plenty of opportunities until you bid your final goodbyes to be able to speak with you as we continue to get updates on what's happening in Alaska. But again, I thank you very genuinely for your years of good work. So Chris, thank you for being on the podcast this morning. And for those of you listening, thank you. Appreciate that you have joined this episode of Murkowski's Message podcast. In upcoming episodes, we're going to be discussing oil and gas markets as well as other energy and natural resource matters. So until then, be safe and be healthy. Thanks so much.